Good afternoon to all the grade 12s. I hope you had a good afternoon and that you are revived to start again with a new section. I am Mrs. Greiling and I will be presenting the topic inflation with you this afternoon. I don't know how many of you were fortunate to watch the news last night and to hear the Minister of Finance, Pravin Gordhan, midterm speech regarding the current economic situations. Because when we speak of inflation, it has a direct impact on our daily lives. So yes, inflation is a topic that is really appropriate to each one of us, and it affects our daily living. So today I'm going to try and explain to you not only what inflation is, but what is required from you, especially now in the exams. What must you be able to do regarding inflation? Right, let us start. What is inflation? I want you to sit back and watch the following. Yes, what did you notice? If we look at inflation, the word inflate means to make bigger and bigger. The most appropriate example that we have is in our daily lives when I have to inflate a balloon. When I start, it starts small, and as the time goes by and I inflate it with more air, it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. But how is that appropriate to our maths? When I speak of inflation, it means that prices are getting bigger and bigger, which of course means things are just getting more and more expensive. Now, what causes inflation? What is the causes to make the prices go up? And as we know, it happens constantly in our lives. The first cause of inflation is the demand pool inflation. This is a type of inflation caused by an increase in demand or in the supply of money. If I could link that to what is currently going on in our country, it means that our country needs money because we need to create jobs. We need to be able to supply people with salaries, and that then puts a demand on the inflation. The second type is the cost push inflation. This is a type of inflation caused by the substantial increase of important goods or services when no suitable alternative is available. Last night in the midterm budget speech, they spoke of our country that has to import so many products, but we are not exporting enough. So we need certain goods and products, and we don't always have it in our own country. And it is products that we need. So in order to fulfill the need in our country, we need to import more. And thus, it causes inflation to increase. The third cause of inflation is built-in inflation. A type of inflation that results from past events and persists in the present. It's called the time value of money. If we look at some countries overseas, example like Italy or mostly Greece last year, in their country they had a big economical problem. And that also is something that caused that country's inflation to increase. So in our country, if, for example, say there was a war, etc., those are also built-in factors that causes inflation to increase. So I hope you've got a bigger picture of the things that influences or causes inflation to increase. This is not important for the exam, but when we study a certain topic, it is good to understand what it means and where it comes from before we can continue. Now, where does inflation fit into our whole picture of our curriculum that we've been studying the whole year? Throughout many of the other lessons that you've listened to, You have heard many of the presenters speaking of Learning Outcome 1, where we work with numbers and operations. Now, when we look at Learning Outcome 1, inflation also forms part of our numbers and our operations in context, because you must be able to calculate inflation. The second thing is that when we work with inflation, we use certain formula. Now that refers to Learning Outcome 2, where we also have to be able to use those formula. A little bit later, I'm going to show you the formula, because sometimes they give it in the question papers and sometimes they don't. So it is of vital importance that you must know your formula, because you won't know whether they are going to give these specific formulae or not. Then, most importantly, when I work with inflation, it is data. And we have had now many presenters that spoke about data and data handling. So when we look at inflation, it is also used as a set of data. So what must you be able to do with the data? You should be able to organize it, maybe in a tally or frequency table. You must be able to analyze it by finding the average, maybe the mean, the median, etc. The third thing that you must be able to do with this data is to be able to present it in a graph, but more important, when it is given to you in the form of a graph, you must be able to analyze it and interpret it. And one of the most popular questions that's always asked is that you must be able to describe the trend or the tendency. And to put that in a plain language, it means you must be able to write down that what you see is happening in the graph. But we'll also do some examples of that as well. Did you know that currently our country's inflation is 5.9%? And the only way that you can find out more information about inflation is by reading magazines, reading the newspaper, and also watching television. Because frequently on the news, they refer to these important figures. And as I said in the beginning, it is something that touches our lives daily. Right, we continue to the next one. The definition of inflation. When I look at the definition, inflation refers to the general increase in prices. Here, I want to show you a price tag at a shop, where on the price tag, I hope you can see this, the original price of the item was 140 Rand. Then there was a second value that was also marked on it, and it was 150 Rand. So there you can see that the same product price has increased. How is that possible? This specific example was due to a shortage of cotton. So what they had to do is they had to increase the price of the garments that were made of cotton, because at that specific time there was a shortage of cotton. Now, in our first slide, we looked at the causes of inflation. And one of them was the demand pull inflation. If there's a demand for something, it increases the inflation. In this instance, when I look at this example, it shows you that there wasn't cotton, so there was a huge demand for it. So it increased the inflation due to the demand of it. Now, secondly, if I look at the definition, it says a decrease in the purchasing power of money. I just want you to look at that section first. Decrease in the purchasing power of money. Now, I wonder how many of you can remember last year's value of your money. You could have taken a 20 rand and go to a store and buy 2 liters of milk and a bread. But this year, if I want to do the same, I realize that my 20 rand can only buy 2 liters of milk. It cannot these days buy 2 liters of milk and a bread. So that shows you that your money has decreased its power of purchasing. So very important, I repeat it again, inflation does not only refer to the increase of prices, but also to the decreasing in the purchasing power of your money. But very important, look at the next part, it says, when measured against a particular standard. So I can just not go out into the world and say, oh, but our money has lost its value. It must be measured against a certain standard. And that standard is called CPI. We are going to learn a bit more about the CPI in a while. There's another example for you. In 1955, the price of milk was 10 cents per litre. In 1968, it was 84 cents per litre. And today, it's approximately 8.50 rand per litre. Yes, the times have changed. Some things get more expensive. But can you do the same with the same amount that you did a while ago? And the answer is definitely no. And why? Because of inflation. Now, let us quickly look at some keywords. Because when you come across these words in a question paper, it is important that you understand what they represent, what they stand for, and what they mean. The first one is Consumer Price Index. If you listen on the radio or over the news, when they do the financial information of the day, they often use this terminology. But what does it mean? This is the index that is used, which is also called the Cost of Living Index. As I say, we know we have a lot of economical strains on our country, and things get more expensive. And can people still survive with the income which they have? And the CPI, therefore, gives them an index to see, but what is the current cost of living? It is used to measure inflation in South Africa by Statistics South Africa. So if you want to Google some more information about the CPI or inflation, a very good place to start is to go to the website of Statistics South Africa and find out a little bit more, because they are the ones that compile all of this information for us, so that it's not necessary for us to go out and to collect the data ourselves. Lastly, it is given as a percentage. This refers now to the inflation. The inflation rate is always in a percentage. And as I said, it was mentioned last night on the television that our current inflation rate is 5.9%. So already you must be alert to know what are the type of calculations I'm going to do. I'm definitely going to work with percentages. Another important thing to remember when we work with the Consumer Price Index, and we'll do some examples of that too, is that there are 3 different CPI indexes. The first one is just the plain CPI. I'll give you an explanation of that now. And then there's also a CPIX and a CPIF. The only difference is the one with the F refers to the total inflation, but they exclude home loans and mortgages. And when it is the CPIF, the F stands for food. So now it only takes the inflation rate of food into consideration. At a later stage, I'll also give you an example and an exercise to do on that. Right, now, how is it measured? Now, it is determined by changes in the prices that the typical urban consumer pays for a representative basket of goods and services. I want to go back to that part where it says the typical urban consumer. Why don't they take rural consumers? Because for us who live in the rural areas, our products need to be delivered. So what is automatically added to our prices? Of course, the transport. So when they do the inflation rate and determine what it is, they focus on urban products. Now, what it also mentioned is that it is goods and services. So if I speak of a representative basket, there is a picture of the basket, but that is only a representation of the food section. If you look at the second bullet, it says approximately 1,500 items are included in an imaginary basket. Yes, such as groceries, clothing, transport, and there's a few others. And one thing I'd also like to bring to your attention is that electricity is also added to this. So when they determine the inflation rate, they bring all of this into consideration. Note, however, it does not mean, say for instance, I'll take one of the items in the basket. Let's take chips. We all love Simba. Now, if I take Simba's price today and tomorrow, it will maybe show an increase, or from 1 month to the next. Maybe the increase is 20 cents or 30 cents. And then I take clothing items. Now, the increase in clothing items will definitely not be 30 cents. So when we look at the inflation rate, it is not to say that every item in that basket increased with the same amount. So, very important, they don't increase with the same percentages, but they are all put together. And now I wonder, whom of you can tell me what will then be used as an answer to the inflation rate? Let us see whom of you were right. The inflation rate is calculated monthly. Now, please remember that we're going to use it somewhere else. It is calculated monthly, but averaged and compounded annually. Now, there I've highlighted the word for you, averaged, because in the beginning I said we work with data. And if I speak of the averaged rate, then I'm speaking of the mean. So yes, my data set will be the monthly numbers, and then I find the mean or the average for my yearly inflation rate. So you can see already what are all the possible calculations you must be able to do. The next one, it says compounded annually. I wonder if you are aware that that sounds very familiar, because we've learned of simple interest and we've learned of compound interest, and now they are saying that inflation rate is compounded annually. Yes, of course, I can use the compound interest formula to calculate the inflation rate. So now once again, there's the formula that I spoke of that you are definitely going to have to use and know as well. Then the next one, the inflation rate represents an average price increase. Remember what I said? The clothing items and the Simba cannot increase with the same number. But what they do is they take 1,500 different items and they find the mean of those items. And that's what we get from Statistics South Africa. And what is it currently? 5.9%. Right, so now you already get a bigger picture. Where does inflation come into our papers? How must I be able to answer it? Now, the next one, what I want to show you, is now a graph representing the data. Because what must you be able to do? And this is especially paper 2 type of question. Interpreting the data on a graph. There is the graph. South Africa's average annual inflation rate from 1982 to 2011. Now, if I look at that, it shows you the annual inflation rate over a period of 28 years. Remember what I said? What is a typical question they love to ask in a paper 2 question? What tendency do you notice? Or what is the trend of the inflation? Are you able to answer me in a full sentence? And please don't say it goes up or it goes down. A balloon which is inflated goes up. But if I'm working with paper 2, people, it is very important that you use good language to express what you see is happening. I can start and see that, yes, I can see the graph goes up and down. But you mustn't write in a question paper, in your answers, it goes up and down. If I see that in the graph the values go down, the correct terminology is the values decrease. Please write it down and go practice your formulation of your sentences. The value decrease. And in this case, it is the inflation rate that decrease. So don't just write in your sentences, it goes up and it goes down. Be specific. The inflation rate decreases. And best yet is to add a value. Yes, then I can look at my graph and I see sometimes the graph goes up. But remember, I don't write the graph goes up. What do I say? I say that the inflation rate increases. Once again, write it down. Go practice it in your formulation of your sentences. So if I look at the overall tendency of this graph, I can see that the inflation rate has from 86, look at the value of 86, where it was almost 19%, which is extremely high for a country's inflation. And then it gradually came down with a few fluctuations up to 2004, where it was at its lowest. Now there are already two possible questions. When was the inflation at its highest? Or when was the inflation at its lowest? And then you can see that it then maybe started increasing. Up to 2010, it decreased. Now I wonder which big event happened in 2010 to ensure that there was a lot of money in our country, which brought down the inflation. I wonder if you know, or whether you can remember. Of course, the soccer of 2010, the World Cup that was hosted. So can you see Good things that happen in our country bring in lots of money. And if the money comes into our country, what happens? The inflation comes down. There I can see it, the positive effect that it had on our country. And then gradually after that, what do I notice? It started to increase again. And as I say, now we know it is 5,9. So there is a possible question. Looking at the graph, interpreting what is happening in the graph, writing good sentences, using the correct terminology, and very important, add values. If I say in 2010 the inflation was very low, then I must be able to say, oh, it was approximately 4,1 or 4,2%. So in your answers, good language, write the words of the things that you are working with and then add values. That shows that you understand what you are working with and that you have interpreted the question. Right. Something I also want you to remember is when we look at a graph overall, please make sure that you understand what is represented by your x-axis and what is represented by your y-axis. Because when I write my sentences, I must be able to say that in 2010, I've used my value of my x-axis and I've used the value of my y-axis. So I said 2010, it was about 4,1 or 2, and it was 4,1 or 2% in the year 2010. So use your axes as references. When I look at that last bullet, it says, an increase in the slope means that the inflation rate is rising, or another word that you can put in the place of rising is increasing. That's a very good sentence to remember if you have to write an answer in the exam. While a decrease in the slope means that it is decreasing. And this is also known as deflation. Remember, our topic for this afternoon is inflation, making it bigger. And this one says deflation. But now look at the last part of that. It says deflation does not mean a decrease in prices. Only a negative inflation rate will result in the decrease of prices. I'll repeat that again. Deflation means a decrease in the inflation rate. Say, for instance, it was 5,9 and next month it is 5,6. So it means there was a deflation in the inflation rate. It does not mean the prices are coming down. It's just the inflation rate that came down. Now, only a negative inflation rate. That means if it is minus 5,9, only then will the prices come down. I will also do an example with you to show you where we have a negative inflation rate and how it affects your calculations. Right, the next slide I want to show you is unfortunately about American dollar and the inflation rate of the dollar. But remember, our context is also about global issues. So I'm going to show you the graph. It is the United States inflation rate over a huge period, 90 or 100-year period. And what is important there is to see, to show you an example of where the inflation rate was negative. So in that period of times, I am trying to indicate it to you, in that period of times, they had a decrease in their prices. Why? Because look at my y-axis. That is all my positive values, and these are all my negative values. Remember, that is one type of graph you must know, is to be able to know if graphs have negative values, what that means. So this instance, it's a graph that you can interpret, showing you the negative values of inflation, which of course means that the inflation has decreased, the prices have decreased. And once again, you can look at the tendency, and since then it has more been positive, which means it was an increase in the inflation. And just before 2010, there was again a negative inflation rate, which showed that the prices came down. So yes, even though it's from America, we can also use it in our questions to see what effect it has. And remember, we are also working with exchange rates. You must be able to convert between different currencies. So this can also be used in questions like those. Right, as I said, I will do an example with you where the inflation rate is negative, where some or other goods prices have decreased. Once again, a possible question that can be asked here for you is to find the average or the mean inflation rate. And once again, describe the trend or the tendency of the inflation rate. So there are a few possible questions. Right, now we're going to move on to the section that I think you are all waiting for, to say, but what calculations must I be able to do? There is the first one. You must be able to calculate the new price of an item using the average inflation rate. As we know, one of the best investments a person can make is to buy property or a house. And because of inflation, it's such a good investment. Now let us look at the question. It says, a house is bought for 950,000 rand. The price of the house increases at an average rate of inflation of 7.5% per year. How much will this house be worth in 2 years' time? Some hint that I want to give you is that when I look at any question, there are two things every question has. The first one is the question gives me certain information. Now, if I say it gives you information, I've actually highlighted for you in this example to show you how many things they gave you to help you to understand the question. It gave you the price of the house, which was 950,000. It told you that it increases. So immediately you must think, right, it's not going to become less than 950. My final answer must obviously be more than 950. So those are little keywords to help you. And then, of course, another value that they gave was the 7.5%, so that I know how much it must increase. And then the last part that I highlighted for you was to say that for how long in a period is it going to increase, which is 2 years. I said a question has two things. The first one was, look what the question gives. I highlighted them for you in blue. And now let's come to the second part of what every question has. And that is, of course, what does the question ask? In this instance, the question asked, how much will it cost over this period of time? I'm going to repeat it again. Look what the question gives. Look at the important information the question gives before I go to the part to see, but what does the question ask? Then only I can go to my calculations, because now I understand what they have given to me. They've given to me values. They've given to me a word that tells me it's going to increase. They've given me by how much it's going to increase. And they also said over what period of time it's going to increase. My question, how much must it be in the end? So if my answer is in years, I know it cannot be right, because what did the question ask? How much? Then I know it must be in rand. So how will I go about in solving this problem? So I said in the beginning, when we work with inflation rates, it is percentage. And now I have to use my calculating skills where I have learned to work with percentage. Right. What do? I say 7 for year 1. Be careful now, remember there's 2 years. Year 1, it increased with 7.5%. So I take my calculator and I say, I'm going to show you this one for just to make sure that you can remember how to use your calculator when it gets to the percentages. Right. There's the calculator. The question was 7.5%. So remember, we say comma, but what do we use on the calculator? We use the decimal point. So 7.5, and now it is percent, but it means over 100. So I'm going to divide it by 100, and that is equals to 0.075 multiply by my amount, what that was, 950,000, which gives you 71,250. Right, now we go back. I said the first one, I calculate, but be very careful, because this 7.5% is only the increase. Remember, we want to know how much will it be at the end of the first year. So what is the important thing to add? Now I must go add my increase to what it was originally. So with the first year's inflation rate, now that house of 950,000 is already worth over R1 million. That we've only done 1 year. Then I have to repeat the same with the second year. I will say, and now this is the catching point, because the 7.5% is not calculated on the original 950. Remember, it is a year later. The house is now worth more than it was originally. So I have to calculate the inflation rate on the new value of the house, the one that has already the inflation compounded. And that gives you then an amount of 76,596.75. But once again, what do I have to do? I have to add the increase to the original amount, which then gives you almost 1,100,000 if it's rounded. Now I know many of your teachers teach you different methods, and I'm just going to show you an alternative method for this question, where we first, in this example, we first calculated the 7.5 and then we added it. The second year, we first calculate the interest and then we add it. But because I know there's some teachers that use a different method, I will just show you that method as well. Right. We're going to use the same question, but I just want to show you the alternative method. Because if I look at the question, it says the 7.5% is added. So many teachers teach you that you say it is your 100%, which is the 950, plus the increase of 7.5%, which gives you then a total of 107.5%. So now I can calculate it in that way, and then I can say, but it is 107.5% multiplied by the 950,000. And I want to show that to you on the calculator. So I'm going to say 107.5. Remember, it's percent, so I must divide it by 100. And then I can multiply it by 950,000. And what do you see? For the first year, my answer is 1,021,250. But once again, remember, I'm just going to write it here. It says year 1. Now I still need to go to year 2. But my inflation rate stays the same. So it's going to be 107.5% multiply, and remember this is the catching point, not on the original value, but on the inflated value, which is 1,021,250. If I do that on the calculator, let us just do that, 107.5%, which means divide by 100, multiply by 1,021,250, and let us see what's the final answer, 1,097,843.75. Remember, this is an alternative method. So let us just quickly go back to the previous method that we used. And let us see whether the answers are the same. And yes, the values are the same. 1,097,843.75 rand. This is to show you that yes, there are different methods in getting to the answer. But what is important is to go back to your question and think what your question asked. Remember, it said, how much will it be in 2 years' time? I've highlighted the answer for you in red to say, how much, then it means my answer must be in rand. And that's how I can check to see whether I have answered my question. Right. Now, we are going to go to the second type of questions that you must be able to calculate. And now you must pay very good attention. You must be able to calculate the inflation rate. Remember I said on the news last night, they gave us the inflation rate, which is 5.9%. But for you in the exams, it is expected of you to be able to calculate the inflation rate. But don't worry, they will give you enough information to be able to do it. Remember my secret. Look what the question gives. Because from that, you will be able to answer it. Now here is an example. First of all, I want you to memorize this formula. Because what I said is that sometimes, and you can go look at past question papers, sometimes they give you the formula and sometimes they don't. In the example of the question paper I'm going to show you a bit later, they did not give it. So, for your own sake, go and learn it. But there's an easy way. I'll show that to you just now. So, formula. the formula for inflation, for calculating the inflation rate, is the increase in price during 1 year. That will be an amount over the initial price, or a word that I often like to use is the original price. And remember, rate, inflation rate, is always measured in percentage. So I have to multiply by 100%. Formula, very, very important. Go learn it. Now here is an example. If I use washing powder, it is a product that we all use daily. On the 1st of January 2012, it was 46 Rand 95. But this year, in January 2013, the same powder, and I can tell you it's the 2 kilogram bag, cost 58 Rand 69. So now there you can see already there's a huge increase. Now the question will ask you, calculate the inflation rate of the product. What is the first thing I do? I write down my formula. And as is the case with any formula, the second rule after I've written down a formula is, of course, substitution. So they tell you what is the information that they need, and you must just go find it and substitute it. It says the increase in the price. That means the difference from the cheapest to the most expensive. So I will subtract them to find the difference over the original price, which of course was what it was first, which is 46 Rand 95. Because it's percentage, multiply by 100%. Then I simplify it. If I find the increase, it increased with 11 Rand 74 over the original amount, which was 46 Rand 95. And if I calculate that, I think I will show that to you. Where did I get to 25%? Right. Just to write it down for you again. It is now the inflation rate, which was 11 Rand 74 over 46 Rand 95. And because it's percentage, I multiply by 100%. Now if I take my calculator, it is 11.74 divided by 46.95. I get my answer and I multiply it by 100. And there is the answer. 25, I'm going to write it here, 25,00532481. And the reason why I'm writing it all down is because you are supposed to round your final answer to 2 decimals, which rounded gives you 25%. Right. Now, I said I wanted to show you a secret, because the formula that we needed for now is not always available, and you must be able to remember it. Now, if I look at that formula, it says inflation rate is the increase in the price over the initial price multiplied by 100%. That is that formula that is used for various calculations. And I want to quickly write them down for you so you can also go and remember them. Right. The first one I have given to you now, you said it's in the inflation rate. But there are other formulas that are similar. It says percentage increase. That's a question I am sure you have come across many times. Calculate the percentage increase. And how do you calculate it? It is the increase over the original number multiplied by 100%. You can substitute the values and you can find the percentage increase. There's another question that often appears in the question papers. It says, calculate the percentage decrease. How do I calculate that? It's so similar. It is, you have to find the decrease over the original number multiply by 100%. Do you notice any similarities? I think so. It's getting easier and easier. There's another one. Percentage, the question will say, calculate the percentage change. I wonder if you can predict what the formula is going to be. It's going to be the change over the original number multiply by 100%. I have to calculate the inflation rate. What is it going to be? The inflation rate is the change in the price over the original number multiply by 100%. So yes, sometimes they give it, sometimes they don't. But what is important is that you must know them. Because like I showed you now, they use it in every question paper. Whether they refer to the percentage increase, the percentage decrease, the percentage change, or even now calculating the inflation rate. The principle of calculating them is the same, and that's why the formulas are similar. So it is not that difficult to go memorize them, because sometimes, as I say, you will find that are not in the question paper. But when you see that terminology, you will know what to do. Right, we are going to go for a short break now. And after the break, we will come back and look at some possible questions that could appear in the paper and some applications of what we have learned now. So remember, if I just can quickly conclude before you break so that you don't forget everything, is that you must know what is inflation. Yes, you must understand what causes it. But more importantly, when it's given to you in the form of a graph, you must be able to interpret it and understand what is happening. What are the calculations that are expected of you? The first one is to calculate a new price if there is inflation. And the one that we've just done is to be able to calculate the inflation rate. And once again, the information that you need will be given to you, but you need your formula to be able to calculate it. Go stand up, stretch your legs, drink a bit of water, because remember, while studying, it's always very good to drink some water. It revives your brain, it helps you to concentrate, and it even keeps you a bit alert. We'll be back in a short time. Thank you.